Okay, so maybe we can take a short break. We'll take a short break and we'll try to sort it out.
All right?
Okay.
Not a problem.
It's the pisa do wek. Pasa, nou ka kouye tout sent misye. Nou vle ou point attention. Ou nation a.
PBF, Programme Performance Based Finance, hod ministre de santé, qui a mis attention à sous affaires de pochiwe, service assessment et traitement pour maladie pisadou et maladie pressure. Ou pas
Are you hearing me?
Ek moun ki 18 l'année de l'âge et plus grand, ça joine service ça là. Registre en centre santé en commune. Facilité santé en premier pas ça là c'est la quoi Jackman.
And of course, we're back. Can you hear us? Can you hear us clearly?
I
No?
can hear you. Can you hear me better?
Oh,
Oh,
lovely,
it's
lovely,
wonderful,
lovely. We can hear you
much clearer.
Much clearer.
Okay.
So you can go.
All right. Apologies for that.
Yeah.
I was just saying before I reintroduce myself, I just wanted to echo your sentiments and send out, happy Pharmacist Day greetings to all the pharmacists around the island. As you have mentioned, they do play such a key role in helping us, with a healthcare. So yes, we write the prescriptions, but a lot of the times they're the ones to kind of break it down for the patients, helping them understand how to take the medications, what to avoid taking with it, and answering a lot of questions that they may have after they've already left us and they go to collect their medications. So to all the wonderful pharmacists, I won't call any names. I don't like calling names because I don't like to miss people. But just hoping they all have a great day today. So as you said, my name is Dr. Vernon. I am a district medical officer working with the Ministry of Health. I am primarily based at the Grosley Polyclinic, where I work in the urgent care department. I'm also involved in a lot of outreach work. I am a host for HealthWise, which is the production of the St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association. So a similar program where we discuss matters pertaining to health. So I'm happy to be here. As I said, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So, Doc, can we start off by talking a little bit about the heart? I mean, we think about it in romantic terms very often. The lay people, we just think about the heart as, the center of all romance, but it plays a very key function. And could you just speak a little bit about the heart and its functions to start off?
Okay, so the heart is at the center of one of our key organ systems in the body. So the heart forms a part of the circulatory system, and that's something we learn about from grade school. My grade 1 and grade 2 students in those classes, I remember her coming and talking about the heart and the blood vessels and all of those things. I'm like, you're learning about this? And she said yes. So it's something we learn about very early. We know that the heart is located in the chest wall, protected by our ribs, and protected because it's a very important key organ. In addition to the heart, we have the veins, the arteries, and the capillaries, which are the smaller blood vessels. And together they work to pump blood throughout our body, providing oxygen, distributing our nutrients. When you take medication, taking it around the body to the site where it's needed. So it's an absolutely essential organ system that we have to take care of, and it's important that we know about it. Speaking of which, as you mentioned, we are having this discussion today because Friday is World Heart Day. The theme actually for this year's celebration is use heart, no heart. And they're actually using the little emoji, the actual heart shape, because I think that's something that's very relatable right now, right? A lot of us, we send our text messages always using a little, happy face, smiley face, etc., to convey our emotions. So the theme is no heart, use heart. And that is so important because it's trying to create awareness and letting persons know, we all know we have a heart, we know it's there, but what does it do and why is it important for us to know? We only tend to protect and take care of things we know. If you see a stranger walking on the road, you're not going to be bothered about what's happening with them. But if you see a family member of yours, probably stranded by the road, you will quicker stop and ask them what's happening. So we tend to care for things that we know about. And so this year's theme is actually targeted at helping us learn a little bit about our heart, why it's important, and why we need to know about it. So in basic terms, I don't want to get too technical. In basic terms, this is the primary function of our heart, is to help us transport oxygen, our nutrients, everything that our body needs throughout all the parts of the body.
And when the heart works well, we are very happy about that. But sometimes we do have circumstances under which the heart would not work well, and we talk about heart disease. So can
Right.
we, I'm sure it's a very broad term, and I would like you to speak a bit about heart disease. You can take it in any direction that you think is best, especially as it relates to the theme for this year.
Okay. So as you said, it's an extremely broad topic. There are different types of heart disease. So I will try to break it down in smaller sections so that we can better understand. So we will start with congenital heart disease. So as with any organ in the body, there are things that can go wrong from inception. So from the time of conception and a baby being formed, you could have what we call congenital heart defects. So these are things that may go slightly wrong, resulting in a defect or an abnormality in the heart when the baby is born. The most common of these congenital heart defects is what we would commonly hear people refer to as a hole in the heart. So the hole in the heart refers to a part of, so the heart is four chambers, four parts, and they're separated by what we call the walls. And you may have a defect where that separation is not complete. And so you have blood flow occurring in ways that it should not be occurring. So the blood should only go through the arteries, the veins, depending on where it is. But when you have a defect in the separation, the blood can now go through those different chambers. And this is what we call a septal defect. It can happen in either the atria or the ventricles, which are the different types of chambers we have in the heart. And it's more commonly, you may hear someone say, you know, their child has a hole in their heart. So that is what they're referring to. There are other congenital heart defects that we can have, but that's the most common one. These are repairable, so they can be surgically repaired. There are some, if they are small enough, they can actually repair on their own as the baby develops and grows, and they may not necessarily need surgery. Fortunately for us, we currently have partnerships that enable us to allow some of our children who have this deformity or this abnormality to actually get the surgery that they need in the US and other places, so that they can go on to live a healthy, full life. So that is congenital heart disease that happens from birth.
So just one question. Do we know what causes congenital heart disease?
So
And
there
is
are
there
different
anything that can be done to prevent it?
there are different things that can cause congenital heart disease. Some of them are just genetic defects. So you have a small gene abnormality and that results in the defect happening. Some of them can be caused by maternal factors. So we always say things like smoking, can cause these sorts of things. In terms of prevention, it's really hard to say we can completely prevent it because of the genetic defect. There is nothing that you can do to prevent. It's just something that's written in the DNA and will manifest itself. But of course, in terms of having a healthy pregnancy, controlling your things like smoking, obesity, your blood sugar, your blood pressure, all those things will prevent your baby from having defects, not just necessarily the heart, but other things as well.
Thank you, Doc.
All right. So coming on, as adults, there are other categories of cardiovascular disease that we have. These are usually separated into four categories. The first one being coronary heart disease. So the coronaries refer to the blood vessels that are found within the heart. You have some bigger ones and you have some smaller ones, but they're all responsible for taking blood around the various parts of the heart. So when you have problems with these blood vessels, and these problems can arise from things like high blood pressure. They can arise from things like plaques, from a buildup of cholesterol in the blood vessels. Those affect the blood vessels within the heart, and that is one category of heart disease which we refer to as coronary heart disease. The second category of vascular disease that we refer to actually has to do with the blood vessels in the brain. So that is cerebrovascular disease, or more commonly called stroke. So you may say, but the brain is not the heart, is different. But remember, we said the circulatory system involves the heart as the main organ, but it also encompasses the veins, the arteries, the capillaries. So when you have the blood vessels within the brain being affected or occluded by the same things, the high blood pressure, the plaques and the cholesterol, you may have blood vessels rupturing from quite elevated blood pressure, and you get what we call a stroke. So that is a different type of vascular disease. The third one is peripheral vascular disease, which usually has to do with the smaller vessels in the peripheries. The peripheries usually refer to not the main organ, but around. So usually we see those in the limbs, so especially the lower legs, right? So if you see persons, especially diabetics or hypertensive patients, usually you may see them and their feet appear very dark in color compared to the rest of their body. You may see some persons who have dilated veins. We have things like varicosities. All of those are part of peripheral vascular disease. And the last one is aortic disease. So the aorta is the main blood vessel. It's the largest one that comes from the heart and actually goes, passes straight down along our back, your spine, all the way, and separates into two major arteries. One goes down each leg. So that is a very large blood vessel, and there can be problems that arise from those. You can have what we call a dissection, where the wall of the aorta kind of separates. That is a medical emergency. You can have an aneurysm, where there's a bulge in that blood vessel. And because it's such a major blood vessel, these usually are critical medical conditions. So these are the four categories of heart disease that we speak about.
Doc, in terms of those four categories, are there any common risk factors associated with the diseases within those four categories?
Oh, definitely. There are a lot of risk factors, and there are a lot of modifiable risk factors that can contribute to these types of disease. When I say modifiable risk factors, I mean things that we can have some control over and that we can change. It has been found that globally, cardiovascular disease is, I want to say, the major cause of death globally. So when you look at the statistics from the World Health Organization, even from our own statistics here in St. Lucia, cardiovascular disease is always up there at the top. It forms part of what we call the non-communicable diseases, and we have found that in recent years there has been a transition, and that is a global trend of the top causes of death being attributed to what we would initially call the communicable diseases. So things like respiratory illness and flus and other things like that are contagious. And now globally, the main causes of death are attributed to non-communicable diseases. So that includes the cardiovascular disease, the stroke, as we mentioned, high blood pressure, things related to diabetes, and these conditions. Now, when we speak about the risk factors for heart disease, there are quite a few. And as I said, there are a lot of them that are modifiable. So some of those that we cannot change, for example, would be our family history. And that's probably one of the more important ones, and one we should be aware of. So if you are someone and you're aware that your mother or your father, your grandmother has high blood pressure or diabetes, which is a chronic condition, the risk of you developing that condition in your life is higher, as opposed to someone who has no family history. So it's very important for you to know what it is exists within your family. If you have a sibling who develops high blood pressure, for example, then you should be like, hey, what's going on? So that you may also be at risk. So family history is one of the things that we cannot change. The other thing that we cannot change and that puts us at high risk is our ethnicity. So as Black people, we are more prone to developing things like high blood pressure and diabetes, both of which are major risk factors for the development of heart disease. So these are the two major ones that we have no control of. Because we have no control over these, we have to look at the other ones and try to see what we can do to control them. So, as I mentioned already, high blood pressure is a major one. And in St. Lucia, we know that the percentage of persons with high blood pressure is very high. There are persons walking around with high blood pressure and they have no idea. High blood pressure is known as the silent killer. And the reason for that is you don't know when your blood pressure is high unless you check it. So the screening recommendations for St. Lucia is that you have your blood pressure checked at every doctor's visit. So if you go to see the doctor for whatever reason, your blood pressure should be checked. And you should also have your blood pressure checked at least once a year from the time you turn 18. Based on the readings that you get, then you will be advised if you should be checking your blood pressure more often, if you need to do some monitoring. If, for example, if you are a 30-year-old who went into the clinic, you had flu, for example, and your blood pressure was checked, you had not checked it in a while, and it was found to be 152 on 92. That is elevated. But a lot of times what we encounter is patients are, oh, but no, I don't have pressure. No, I don't. Right? And then you ask them, well, when is the last time you checked your blood pressure? And they haven't. It's been years, and this is the first time that they're doing. So lots of them will say, oh, but doc, I have pain. I'm not feeling well. And it's true, having pain and the like can cause your blood pressure to be a little more elevated than your norm. So in a lot of these situations, we ask the patients to return in a few days, or if they have access to a monitor, to do the monitoring at home, a few readings, and bring them back into the clinic so we can have a look. And oftentimes we end up diagnosing those patients with high blood pressure. It's just that they were unaware that they had the condition. So that's high blood pressure. The other risk factors are...
Hold on a minute, Doc. Let's talk a little bit more about high blood pressure, because it's one of those conditions that affect very many people in St. Lucia. And we have a lot of myths probably associated with high blood pressure. There are some people who swear that they can feel when the pressure is high. Some of them will
Yes.
talk about feeling something in the back of their head or their neck, or some aspect of their body will indicate to them that their pressure is high. And
Yeah.
the other thing is that you find many people who come into screening, they come in and they might get a first high reading. And as you said, they may have various logical reasons why. But there are some people who consistently get high readings and they are in denial. Basically, they will not accept that they have a health problem, that they have a problem with their pressure. So is there anything you'd like to say to those people, probably to encourage them or to explain further to them?
Okay. It can be very difficult. We have a lot of persons who are very resistant to accepting the diagnosis of high blood pressure and diabetes when we tell them that this is what the readings and the clinical information, the lab tests, etc., is showing. It can be very difficult. And what I always like to, or try to explain to patients, is that by the time, for example, those with high blood pressure who say, well, I can feel when my pressure is high. I say, by the time you feel something, it usually means that we are at an extreme stage, right? And I said, many people with high blood pressure who are walking around with elevated blood pressures, they don't realize something is wrong until you're tombe, blikitik, you only heart attack, right?
That's
Or
right.
stroke. And then you will have people say, hey, pate malad, pate kapon, you bed, pate but the high blood pressure was there. It's just that they were unaware because they have never checked. And I tell people, sometimes persons come, the blood pressure is elevated. You probably look back and you realize that the last time they came, it was also elevated. The advice was given, they probably did not do the follow-up, right? So I said, well, 3 months ago you were here, it was also elevated. I think we need to intervene. try to explain to them. Most times we would recommend them to see the nutritionist to help them with their meal preparation, cutting down of salt, and the other things that usually contribute to the blood pressure being elevated. We speak to them about exercise. We speak to them about getting more active, which can also help to lower the blood pressure. We ask about their family history. Is there anyone? And a lot of times they'll say, well, yes, my mother has it. So we try to explain to them all the reasons why, it's showing that they have high blood pressure. The other thing that I try to explain to them, whereas before we were seeing these conditions in persons who were older. So we're getting, 50, 60, 70-year-old persons who now getting diabetes and high blood pressure. Right now, we are seeing patients who are very young developing these conditions. So I'm talking in their 20s even, right? And what I try to tell them is, if you had a 60-year-old, for example, who develops high blood pressure, say the complications come 20 years later, that person will be 80 by the time they develop the chronic kidney disease, or by the time they probably get a heart attack from the arteries in the heart being affected. They will be 80. By that time, that person has lived an almost full life. They're retired. The effects are probably not going to be felt as strong than somebody who is 25 and develops high blood pressure. In 20 years, that person is 45. You are still supposed to be able to work. You probably have young children. You probably still pay your mortgage, like all of those things. At 45, you're still in the prime of your life. So I try to say to them, if you do not take care of whatever it is that we're telling you now, imagine in 20 years, you suddenly have a stroke or a heart attack and something happens to you. If you do not pass away, you may now be unable to work because, with stroke, you can have paralysis, you can have, all of those things. So you're now bedridden. Your family is left to care for you. I try to make them look at the big picture, the long-term complications of ignoring the diagnosis early on, as opposed to taking care of it and trying to ensure that they're able to live a longer, fuller life. The other major complication that we see is the chronic kidney disease and persons having to be on dialysis. Dialysis is a process which is 4 hours, 3 times a week. Imagine having to work, but you have to go to dialysis 3 times a week for 4 hours. How much time is it out of your work week, right? Some persons afterwards, they're weak, they're, different things. So that's how I try to encourage patients to recognize this chronic condition. It is not going to go away. It is necessary to make the lifestyle changes, the diet changes, and to take the medication that is recommended so that you can live a longer, fuller life. And then the other thing with the medication, because that's the other problem, is adherence to the medication. I tell persons, if you get prescribed a medication and for some reason you think it's not going with you, that's what that's how they say it, right?
Yeah.
I said, don't just stay home and not take it. Come back to the clinic and let us know, I think this is giving me some indigestion. I can't eat or I can't sleep. There are many alternatives. Right now, there are so many newer medications. We have options. We can switch out medications if you have an allergic reaction. And there are options that we have to ensure that you have treatment that works for you to control your blood pressure or your blood sugar.
Yes. So communication with your healthcare provider is actually very important as it relates to some of those key issues there, because as you said, a lot of people would just stop taking the medication, or they would switch to, our traditional stuff. They switch to our traditional stuff without ever having a discussion with the doctor. And I usually tell patients there's no reason to be afraid of your doctor. To the clients at the wellness centers, there's no reason to be afraid of the doctor. The doctor is human. Have a conversation. But it can be very intimidating for clients to have that type of conversation, because sometimes they look at the doctor as the expert. So I think it's very important for doctors, for healthcare providers to be a bit approachable in that sense, so that people feel a little bit more comfortable. That is one of the ways in which we can actually tackle that problem. Yeah.
Agreed.
So
Yes, I agree. And then what I always tell patients, because sometimes after you speak to them, I try to ask them, "Did you understand what I said? Do you have any questions? Is there anything you'd like to ask me?" Sometimes, in the moment, it can be a bit overwhelming to take everything in, but I always, the nurses are always available. So even if, for example, in some of the wellness centers throughout the island, there may not be a physician there every day, but the nurses are always there, and the nurses are an excellent resource. They can help you if you have questions about anything. You don't understand something, you want to just check the blood pressure. They're always there, and they're always willing to help. So I always encourage persons, and I certainly agree that we should try and make it accessible, approachable, so that they do not feel intimidated to actually come and seek the care. One of the initiatives of the Ministry of Health actually is that the know your numbers, right? As I mentioned, a lot of people are just walking around and they don't know what their numbers are. So some of the numbers that is necessary to know: your blood pressure, your weight, what's your BMI, all of those things. And for persons who may not have a blood pressure monitor and are now wondering, boy, well, where am I going to go and check my blood pressure? There are actually two stations. One is at the Viewport Plaza and one is at the Baywalk Mall. It's actually just like a little cubicle with an automated machine where you can go and you can have your blood pressure checked. It gives you the instructions, what to do. It tells you where to put, the cuff, and there's actually some detailed information. It will tell you if it's in the normal range, if it's high, and give you advice. So that is somewhere for persons in the south at the Vifor Plaza, and in the north at Baywalk Mall. You can just walk there, get your blood pressure checked, and if it's abnormal, then obviously the advice would be to consult a medical professional for further advice. So just
yes,
thought
so
I'd
that follow-up would be very important.
yes.
It's
So
not
if it's
just
high,
about
don't just ignore it.
getting the reading, the follow-up is
Is
important.
important.
Yes. So, Doc, I think after hypertension, you were hoping to move on to something. I think I sidetracked you. I don't know if you can get back on track. Do
Let me
you
see.
remember
I
where you
think
were
we're talking about the risk factors.
headed?
So we mentioned hypertension. Another significant risk factor is diabetes, which is the other major chronic illness that we have in St. Lucia. So diabetes has a significant effect on the blood vessels, and the blood vessels, as we know, that's where the blood passes. That's where the deposits from the cholesterol and everything goes, and that's what causes the heart attacks and those things. So persons who have diabetes are actually at increased risk of having cardiovascular disease. So that's another thing to be aware of. So it's important to know what your blood sugar levels are, and if you're diabetic, to take care of it properly. Obesity is another risk factor. So again, that kind of ties in with you may have heard of metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of having elevated blood pressure, elevated blood sugar, discrepancies in your cholesterol levels. So together, that is called metabolic syndrome. And also sometimes they look at central obesity being the size of the abdomen. So you sometimes see persons who are not grossly obese, but they have increased central adiposity, so fat deposited around the belly. So that is not a good thing to have. And that's where we speak about the exercise and its importance in preventing heart disease. So these are, I think, the major risk factors that we can actually look at and try to intervene.
Okay. So, Doc, let's talk a little bit just about obesity. In St. Lucia, we tend to like to think that we can just look at somebody and decide if the person is obese, but we actually do have, you mentioned the BMI earlier.
Mhm.
So we do have different tools to help us to diagnose or say when a person is obese. So the BMI would be a measure that looks at your weight and your height, and
Right.
then you get a reading. So somebody who is obese, their number would be 30 and above, right? Now, I
Yes.
noticed that our nutritionists have some very fancy scales, and they have
Yes.
some very fancy scales that can help to give an idea of other anthropometric measures, other things that they can measure. So things like the fat around your organs, So the visceral fat, how much muscle mass you have, what percentage of muscle you have, and what it should be for your age. So there are many things, many measurements that we need to know. So you spoke about um the size
Central
of the
nervous system.
abdomen. So we talk about the waist circumference to get that measured. So all of these things help us to know what our status is as it relates to health and the risk of developing some of those chronic non-communicable diseases. Now, before we move on, I just want to check whether we have any comments or questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to call or send them in via the chats and the WhatsApp.
Right, and we have plenty of folks over on Facebook. Good morning to Facebook. All right, let me shout out to Kevin Paul, doctor all over the world, treat people like children. Ladies, can you explain the high blood pressure so the uneducated can learn? But I think you'll got into that.
Yes, but I think maybe we did not go into the specifics of what the numbers are, Doc. So if we could just explain a bit what we mean by high blood pressure, and probably, some people may be a little bit confused as to whether one reading determines whether somebody is considered to be hypertensive or to be living with hypertension. So if we can just talk a little bit about the different
And
numbers.
not to instill fear, but yes, the statistics. Because sometimes person take it for granted, but when they hear, boy, check the amount of persons that's suffering with that illness, they'll reconsider, and they should.
Okay. So we spoke about high blood pressure, but it's true we didn't mention the actual figures. So I think
Yeah.
generally, most people, most articles, everything you see will tell you that normal blood pressure is 120/80. So blood pressure is always measured with two readings, what we call a systolic, which is the top number, and a diastolic, which is the bottom number. I'm not going to get into technical information because I want people to understand what I'm saying. Basically, the readings give you an idea of at what level, when the heart is pumping, what the pressure is in the heart at the time and in the blood vessels. So when we use the machine, we listen for the heartbeats and we check at what pressure we stop. So that helps us determine what the blood pressure is. For persons who 128 is usually what we describe as normal blood pressure. Anything above that, we look at. So in St. Lucia, according to our protocols, and we try to use protocols throughout the island, so everyone is getting the same treatment. Anything above 140/90 is automatically considered as hypertension. There are numbers between the 120 and 130 and between 130 and 140 where we may look and try to intervene with diet and exercise. But usually persons who are over 140, we want to initiate medication. We're not waiting for when you get to 150 and 160 because at that point, it's unlikely that just diet and exercise is going to allow the blood pressure to come back down to an acceptable level. Right? So there are many people who tell you, oh, but it's just 135. That is a cause for concern because the likelihood of it going up is there. So I think the first thing we need to do is to just know the numbers and get your blood pressure checked. And if you have a concern, to speak to your doctor about it.
Thank you for that clarification, Doc. Would you like to at least share why the top number is expected to be higher than the bottom number?
The top number is the number when the heart kind of contracts to let the blood out. So you need more pressure to do that. The bottom number, the diastolic, is when the heart relaxes and accepts blood coming from the lungs into it. So that is when it's more relaxed. So we expect that number to be lower.
Okay, thank you, Doc. So for those of you just joining us, we are talking about the heart today. On Friday, we observe World Heart Day. And as Doc said, the theme is use heart. What? No heart, use heart, Doc?
No heart. Yeah. Use heart, no heart.
Oh, I have
and the
it
color
back to
is
front.
red, which is why
And
I'm
the
wearing
color
red.
is red. I think I'm there. I would lift my
Yes,
leg to show you my pants. I actually have on red pants.
great. So encourage everyone to wear red today to show awareness that they're thinking about
Yes,
their hearts, getting to know their hearts, and taking care of it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Do we have any other questions on Facebook?
Not at the
Not at the moment. So, Doc, can we go into some of our we spoke a bit about risk prevention, but I think you wanted to go a little further.
Yes. I
Yes.
think the most important thing,
Risk reduction, sorry.
risk reduction. Yes. So we already mentioned the modifiable risk factors. The first step is awareness. The first step is knowing. So as we mentioned, to know your numbers, to know what your blood pressure is. If you have not had your cholesterol checked in a while, to go ahead and to get that blood test to see what your cholesterol levels are. To check in terms of your blood sugar levels. We can also do the blood test for that. See what your fasting blood sugar is. With the HbA1c is a blood test also that looks at your overall blood sugar control over a 3 month period. So that gives us a very good indication of where you are. One of the things that it also tells us is if you are in a pre-diabetic range. So if we do the HbA1c and we recognize that somebody is in the pre-diabetic range, that is a crucial point where you can intervene and advise and let them know, hey, you need to be looking at your blood, your sugar control, how much sugar you're consuming, because if you do not, you will eventually come out of the pre-diabetic and go to the diabetic range, and we don't want that because, as we mentioned, that this is one of the key risk factors for the development of cardiovascular disease. Recently, you may have heard about the St. Lucia Moves campaign. So the Solution Moves campaign is a campaign which is geared at creating more awareness of physical movement, physical activity in St. Lucia in general. And it starts from all ages and all persons. So the goal is to look at activity that is geared for your age and your ability. So you may have persons who say, well, I can't run because of whatever reason. Maybe you had a previous injury, maybe you're just not able to run. But there are exercises that you can do that will still increase your level of physical activity without you having to run. So there are different types of exercise that people can do. And it doesn't have to be the same for everyone. The recommendation is to get at least 150 minutes of activity in for the week. And a lot of us are below that. The survey for St. Lucia shows that most of us are not achieving that goal. When you think about it, we go into work, we sit at our desks all day, we probably get up, we go to the elevator, maybe you get up, you go buy lunch, come back, or so. But the amount of exercise you get in the day, you get in your car, you're in traffic for an hour, so when you reach home, you're tired, right? But there are a few things that we can do to kind of work it into our day. One of the other things that we have developed is workness wellness programs, and we encourage persons in different workplaces to actually care about the health and wellness of your employees. Because if your employees are healthier, it's going to decrease on sick days, sick time. They're likely to be happier, likely to be more productive, right? So some persons might think of it as, I am not spending any extra money trying to quote unquote take care of my employees. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't always necessitate a lot of time and extra money. It could be half an hour, say on a Friday, say you normally close at 4:30. You can close at 4 o'clock on that one day and have a short activity for your staff, whether it's a soccer size, some games, you'll play tennis or not tennis, out on the beach, volleyball, you something where they get moving, you get to interact with other persons, and you increase your physical activity. Encouraging persons to walk around the office. So you may see somebody, they get up from their desk and you're like, why not at your desk? You should be working. But I mean, come on. Every hour it's recommended that you actually stand up from your desk and walk around for, about 5 minutes to get your blood circulating. And so that 5 minutes is crucial. It's 5 minutes more than if you don't do it, right? So if you do it every hour, at the end of the day, you will accumulate some steps. And even if you're walking around, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing work. If you have to see somebody within your building, instead of calling them on the phone, you can walk down to their office and say, hey, I'm looking for the whatever it is that you're looking for, right? So simple things like that will actually help. We also have if you try to break things down into smaller sections, you're more likely to get good results. So, for example, we have Water Mondays, and Water Mondays are where we encourage only water for that day. So, if you normally buy juice for your lunch, or you usually have juice with your breakfast, juice for lunch, we're encouraging to only have water that day to decrease your sugar intake. Um, and water is, I mean, it's
Doc,
so hard
just
to
to
take.
clarify, when you said only water, people might think you mean fasting. You can
Oh,
eat
no, no.
but your drinks.
Yes, only for all your unsweetened
A
drinks.
complete
So only
24-hour fast
water
with
for that
water
day.
only. That's what might come into mind for some people.
Yes,
So let's
thank you for that.
clarify.
So with your meal, as opposed to having a sweetened drink such as juice or a soda or malt, which also has a lot of sugar, you would have water. So for the entire day, you substitute all your sugar sweetened beverages with water. On Tuesdays, it's Meditation Tuesday, and again, that people might be like Meditation Tuesday, but
Before
of
we go
late,
into
mental
Meditation
health.
Tuesday, can we go back to the Monday? Because, sometimes we don't think about the amount of sugar that we actually consume in the various drinks. So, it, we talk about drinking more water, but when we look at some of the prepackaged juices or juice drinks, the sugar content is very high. And just
Extremely.
to point out that our recommended intake for adults is only 9 teaspoons. And I usually tell people it's not the teaspoons we have in the drawer at home, it's actually the measuring teaspoon, which tends to be
Right.
smaller. So
Smaller.
those 9 teaspoons are for adults. That's all that's recommended for the day. Added sugar, and that includes all of our sugars. So as you said, in our coffee or tea in the morning, our juice, our porridge, our snacks, some of the sugary snacks that we eat. And when we look at the label, we need to be able to look at the label and see how much sugar is actually in whatever it is we're going to consume. So if we pick up a box of juice and it says, for example, 20 grams of sugar, that means nothing to most of us.
Right.
So so those 20 grams of sugar, then we would divide by 4 and get the number of teaspoons, which is 5. So then we realize from that one drink, we're consuming more than half of our daily recommended intake. So these are things
Right.
that we need to be aware of so that we know why we are being asked to consume more water. So,
Definitely. Thank you for expounding. It's so important, and this is especially important for the children because a lot of those box drinks contain more than double what they should be having for the entire day in just one box. And there are people who unfortunately, have or serve their children more than one for the day. So
yes.
you want to start at an early age. So even the Water Mondays applies to the children too. That day there's no juice in the lunch bag. And I don't think it's a healthy habit that children have juice in their lunch bags every day, especially it's extremely hot these days, and the sweetened drinks actually can dehydrate you further. So, I would encourage parents to give their children more water as opposed to sugar sweetened beverages. And when you are purchasing the drinks, I know sometimes there's a financial constraint, and those that are probably more heavily sugar laden are probably less expensive. But if you can purchase those that are healthier options, then your child will benefit greatly lower down later in life. So that's
And
one of
our
the
local juice is always good, just with a little less sugar. Don't make it too sweet.
right. Exactly. You have more control of the amount of sugar that you
Exactly.
add.
Not
Yeah.
only the sugar, but the other additional preservatives and so on that
Yes.
go into those
So
box
definitely
drinks.
a healthier option.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I was mentioning Meditation
Yes.
Tuesday. So Meditation Tuesday, some persons might don't not think it's important, but it's so important because of late our mental health has risen in its popularity. We've been talking a lot more and trying to have more open discussion on mental health. it's definitely an issue here in St. Lucia. And I think coming off of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's one of the things that I found uh, was greatly impacted by the pandemic. So, loneliness and persons being away from others, people losing their job, losing family members due to the illness, and then also persons who, went into depression because maybe they lost their job or maybe they lost a family member, different things, right? So the mental health aspects of health, remember, as your introduction for the show speaks about health, not just a state of physical well-being but also mental, right? So the meditation Tuesday gives you some time to actually stop, to think, to relax your mind, think of everything, the stressors, trying to put them aside, so that you can feel a bit more refreshed and able to go on with the day, with everything else that's happening around you, right? Wednesday is Fitness Wednesdays. So at the Ministry of Health, every Wednesday we had a fitness activity. So again, it's something that other persons can look at in your business spaces, for example. Thursday is Vegetable Thursday. So on Vegetable Thursday, we encourage persons to have half of their plate with vegetables. I mean, normally our plates should have more vegetables than starch. And that's one of the disadvantages. For example, when you purchase a meal here, generally you get provisions, you get rice, you get macaroni and cheese or chow mein, and then you have like green fig salad or potato salad or something. And all of that comes from, it's carbohydrates or staples. You get a little bit of salad, a little bit of peas, and then your meat. So on that day, we're asking persons to have more vegetables on your plate as opposed to, so you can have your meat, your peas, your legumes, which is very important, but to decrease some of that starch. So instead of all of these starchy sides, and your vegetables, remember, you can have your vegetables in multiple forms. So you can have a fresh salad where you have, like lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, and then you can have some steamed vegetables with, carrots and okras and broccoli or whatever else that you can get, right? Cabbage and all of those things. So you have your vegetables in different forms so that it's not boring. You have different tastes and different flavors along with your meat and your beans. And Fridays are Fruit Fridays. Ideally, we should get every day 5 servings of fruits. And when you think about it, how many persons actually do get 5 servings of fruits?
Some of us don't get any for the day.
Exactly, right? So if you don't get to 5, but at least on that day, you should try to have a little more, right? We do have local fruits available, and we always have something that's in season, so you may not get everything all the time, but when you do have it available, we have some nice options for our fruits. So that's another initiative, and it just helps you be a little more aware, more conscious of the things that we need to do to help take care of our bodies and take care of our hearts.
Thank you, Doc. That was very well done. We appreciate you being on the program this morning. And I hope that our listeners were able to really understand the importance of all of those things, the know your numbers, the lifestyle changes, the follow-up visits after you get those high readings, the importance of knowing not just the high blood pressure, the pressure and sugar numbers, but also the other things like the waist circumference you spoke about, the BMI, and all of those things are important factors that can contribute to heart disease. And of course, we're going to encourage maybe for the entire week to wear a little red, as they say, a touch of red, just to remember that the heart is important and we need to take care of it. We need to know about it. We need to take care of it. So, Doc, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to having you with us again.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Just before I leave, I just wanted to let persons know, I hope you got something from the discussion today. It's a very short time to speak about a very broad topic that has many topics within it. If you have any questions or something that you're not sure of, feel free to visit your wellness center and have a little talk with the nurse or the doctor if you're able to help clarify any doubts that you may have and to help you better take care of yourself and your heart. Just want everyone to remember, in St. Lucia, as I said, 82% of our deaths, our mortality is due to cardiovascular disease. That is a lot. right? And a lot of these are preventable deaths. So globally, 1 in 3 deaths in men is from preventable cardiovascular disease, and 1 in 5 is in women, right? Right now, we are at a point where in our clinics, we see 40-year-olds coming in having heart attacks. And that's not something we used to see before. And these persons are also dying because sometimes, they wait too late, and by the time they come in, it's unfortunately we are not able to save them. So I want persons to just be aware, and if there is something that you are unsure of, you don't understand, do not hesitate to get that help or to ask questions. We are here to help. Health is wealth. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. Now, before we end the program, I would just like to share an announcement that came in. A reminder to all in Soufrière and the surrounding areas of the Cuban Eye Clinic taking place at the Itangs Wellness Center on Wednesdays. At the Itangs Wellness Center on Wednesdays, the Cuban Eye Clinic will be taking place. So please feel free to go in or call if you have any questions. Call. There's no time specified, so I imagine that it starts in the morning. So you can call the Wellness Center and get some more information as to when you can come in, whether you make an appointment or what the procedure is, because that information did not actually come in. But I believe that you can probably do some walk-ins if it's not very busy. But please call the Wellness Center at Itangs. I don't have the number, unfortunately, to share with you at the moment, but feel free to call and find out a little bit more about the Cuban Eye Clinic and make use of the service. So thank you to all of our listeners. Thanks again to Dr. Vernon. Thank you to Erlan and Romanus for always making the program happen as it should on a Monday morning. We really appreciate all of you and see you next Monday.